Good morning and welcome to the coffee chat. I did not make coffee, so we'll see how today goes. My name is Dr. Rachel Tatman. Welcome to my channel. It's for anybody who cares about language, technology, and other people. And we've got a full slate of things to talk about. So as usual, I'm gonna chop it into sections. We'll start with research. Not a whole lot today. There hasn't been a major research conference since the last time we talked, so but a couple things, and then just sort of like practical stuff that you need to do your job or that might be useful to you. And then politics, a lot of court cases this week, actually. So we'll talk about those. And then ethics, just sort of, you know, Luke, Dana, hello, welcome, welcome. Various things. So maybe it wasn't illegal to do, but should you have done it? So we'll talk about that. And finally, I always like to end on a high note with just a couple, a couple little fun miscellaneous things at the end. Also, my apologies if you are in the links, please. Tier of my coffee support, it's on that side. Doop, doop. I didn't get them out today. I lost a bunch of work this morning and I am still upset about it, but they will go out today. And also, if you are in the Chit Chat Club tier of monthly support, or if you want to join, now is a good time because tomorrow is going to be our August Chit Chat. So it's just a video call. We all hop on, have a little chin wag, and it's a good time. And I'm just going to double check that I said the right date. Yes, so tomorrow at the same time as stream, if you are interested in joining. And that's all on my coffee. With that out of the way, let's talk about research. Hello, Sultan, Sanskar, and Mohammed. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Research. So I just have a couple things today to talk about in research. And the first one is, this is from Alex Warstadt, who I believe just defended his dissertation. No, still working on dissertation. Never mind. Oh, let me get that out of that. No, shoot. I want this to be out of the way. There we go. And has a interesting premise that I have some thoughts about. So it looks like this is an ongoing research program together with Sam Bowman, who, again, I don't know, if any of y'all are terminally on Twitter and in the linguistics/NLP space, you may be familiar with it. And it's sort of an interesting thought experiment. I'm a little bit skeptical, but also I'm willing to admit that I might be wrong, and I'm happy to read more. Hello, Naveen, welcome. So I should say here, Alex is saying human language learning. What he means is language acquisition. So there's a very key distinction in in linguistics and language research between language learning and language acquisition. Language acquisition is how children acquire their first language or languages. It seems to happen purely by exposure, and sort of modeling and understanding, why that's possible and how it works is a big part of how a big part of research, right, into how language works and what it tells us about what it means to be human. Language learning is done effortfully, right? You have to try to do it. And it is when you are learning a language after your first language or languages, right? So if you took, in school, you learned English or French or German or whatever, or Hindi, whatever language it is that you learned in school, that is language learning. And they are distinct things. They seem to have pretty different sort of like neurological implications. Again, language acquisition seems to be an innate human quality. Language learning is an effortful thing that you can do, right? I'm not saying that people can't do it, but it does seem to be a different process. So every time language learning is said here, substitute language acquisition, and it's a really important distinction. And of course, based on the paper title, I think Alex understands that, and is just, I,
「
Uh, I guess being imprecise for clarity. Although learning and acquisition are about as many characters. Anyway, okay, it looks like some things would be, you know, some things were deleted from the thread, so that. And the sort of general argument here is that, you know, obviously it's not a perfect proxy, but we might be able to learn some things about language acquisition. And the reason why it might make sense is that, you know, it is very expensive to do child language research because obviously the people who are acquiring language are children. It doesn't seem to be something adults can do. In limited situations where people have been deprived of language access, which is wildly unethical, right? Hence the sort of this next point. They just never learn language at all, right? So there's definitely a critical period for being able to acquire your first language or languages. And I keep saying that because some people acquire multiple languages as children. And I'm sure many of you actually probably just playing with statistics are in that sort of cohort where you have multiple first languages. In which case first language is maybe a little bit of a misnomer. But yes, if you've ever worked with children as experimental subjects, there's one piece of wisdom that my undergraduate thesis advisor imparted to me as I was preparing to go to graduate school. And she'd done her work on child language acquisition and I believe prosody and acquisition of prosody and focus. It was a while ago. Hi, Erin, if you're watching. You're probably not, but if you are, hey. And she said, do not do research on children because it added, you know, years to her dissertation work because they're very difficult to get in the lab. You can't use all of them. They don't always do the thing that you expect them to do. When a kid is done, right? You can't like cajole them into being not exhausted. So yeah, it's hard to get acquisition data. And again, these are language acquirers, not language learners. It's an important distinction. A good way to start a fight with linguists. And then ethics, right? You don't want to mess with kids, right? There was that experiment with orphans from, I want to say maybe the 30s or 40s, where they basically didn't give the children any positive human experiences, or was it like, anyway, there's been some wildly unethical experiments done on children. We don't do that shit anymore. It is bad, whereas the sort of argument here is like, well, but you can do experiments on large language models and that's fine, and then of course you can experiment on them. And I think, you know, it's a approach. I don't know, like my biggest issue with taking this approach is that it plays into this trope of, you know, neural networks are neural, right? They are cognitive models. And that is not the case. They are not explicitly built as cognitive models, therefore they are not them, right? You can't just use something kind of similar and give it the same name and have it magically be the same, right? Like, I can't substitute all butter with peanut butter because they're both called butter. You feel me? Which is sort of like the issue with neural networks in general, is that I think there's an assumption that both the brain works like a computer and that neural networks work like brains. And that's not really the case, although you can create a neural network that is a cognitive model. It is a separate task, and most people aren't doing that. And if you're not sure if you're doing it, you're probably not. So yeah, I think we may be able to observe some phenomena. I don't know about the ecological validity of those phenomena and how well they will actually capture the processes that are going on during human language acquisition. And of course, language models are not social agents, and that is inseparable from language acquisition. So there's been a lot of work done, actually at the University of Washington, where I got my PhD, showing that human interaction improves both language acquisition and language learning, live human interaction with a person far over even recorded interactions, or interactions through a screen. So interacting with other humans in your environment, again, seems to be pretty critical for language acquisition. And also, honestly, language learning. I don't want to dunk on Duolingo. It's, I'm sure, a very helpful tool for a lot of folks, but it's not going to give you communicative competence, right? Which is usually why people are trying to learn a language. So anyway, I think it's sort of interesting. I'm willing to read the research that comes out of this, but I also feel pretty strongly that there are other things that you could do that would be more effective, if more difficult, if what you really want to learn about is language acquisition. So that's my response to this position paper. And like I said, I'm willing to admit I might be wrong, and we might find out a lot of really cool stuff. And if you're interested in reading this thread, you can check it out. And it's by A_STADT. And I believe Alex is a student, and then Sam is his advisor. Yep. Dana says, does this mean I have to supervise my unsupervised machine learning algorithm as a joke? No, because machine learning is not human learning. And even though it may sometimes have some similar qualities, that doesn't, they're not the same thing, right? Anyway, you may be able to tell this gets my linguist dander up a little bit. But again, I'm happy to read the research and see what we can learn. And I am fascinated to see if they can get this published in the child language acquisition journals, which are, I say, would be a good target for this particular type of work. Also on research, and this is just sort of like a scholarly discussion on Twitter, from Dipped Rusk. They're at the Pronouns and Machine Translation Workshop and are live tweeting it. So this is particularly interesting because, so some of you may be familiar with the concept of grammatical gender, right? And that just means that in languages that have grammatical gender, there are classes of words that share morphological, usually, characteristics. So for example, in French, if a word has feminine gender, it will take feminine articles. It will take, feminine adjectives. So only nouns are gendered in French. It's been a while since I learned French. I don't think that there's any gendering of verbs, right? So this morphology doesn't interact with the verbs. It is specifically a way of grouping nouns together. And there's lots of different ways of grouping nouns together. So if any of you speak Chinese, you're probably familiar with sort of the types of classes that have different like counting particles with them, like the g in, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna apologize in advance, but like igeren, right? The g in there, that counting particle, those counting particles are parts of classes of nouns. Or, in American Sign Language, you have sort of referential hand shapes. So like this is the hand shape for generally vehicles, right? So like this could be a motorcycle or a car. It's a class of nouns that are represented using a grammatical construct. And grammatical gender is one of those classes of noun, is one of those ways of classing nouns. And not, I think for a lot of English speakers, you might assume that the gender is masculine and feminine. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes you'll have, masculine, feminine, neuter. So you'll have 3 genders or possibly more genders. It's very diverse across languages. And again, it's just ways of grouping nouns. But because often those noun groupings will include person nouns and will include personal pronouns. So like my personal pronoun is she or her, and that's how people would refer to me if they were talking about me in the third person. Vagrant on Twitter's pronouns are Z and Zim. So we refer to Zim as Zim if we were talking about Zim in the third person, which we are. And the difficulty with that is when there is a mismatch between the grammatical genders, or what pronouns associated with which grammatical gender would be used for which person or object between languages, and then you do machine translation, the machine translation often makes errors, right? So like Turkish has a neutral gender third person pronoun that you can use for people and not be rude. So like him, her, it. But it would refer to a person, them, I guess actually is the example for English. I forgot about a complete pronoun. Linguistics degree. I told you I didn't have my coffee. Anyway. But the point is that in machine translation, you are moving between languages with different grammatical gender systems or different, noun class systems in general. And as a result, you get lots of weird errors. And this is a thread that is looking at a variety of things in this, but gender is a big part of it, and grammatical gender in particular is one of the reasons why you would have a whole pronoun workshop, because it's very difficult machine translation. That was a really long intro to this thread that I just totally went off on. Yeah. Oh, Alexi says, I forgot my native tongue. Oh, weird to see an old VHS and not be able to understand myself as a child. That's pretty sad. I'm sorry. But yeah, also definitely, definitely a thing that happens. And I mean, I don't know if this was the case in your instance, Alexi, but unfortunately, a lot of times that happens sort of around the world as a result by concerted effort by people to reduce the population of a language speaker. So, I mean, I think an obvious example right now is Uyghur, but, you know, in the United States, and Canada, a lot of indigenous or First Nations languages don't have a lot of speakers because of the, you know, intentional decisions by the governments of those countries to, you know, basically kidnap children and force them to only speak English. And as a result, you know, a lot of those children did lose their first languages as an act of colonial violence. So yes, it's definitely possible to, you know. Anyway. A bit of a bummer, but also a thing that happens, and I think is important for people working with language data to think about. 9 says, there's a language, Santali, that has only human and no human, but no gender. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways of classing nouns around the world, and I don't know, linguistics is a little bit like anthropology in that if you've never really thought about it, you might assume that the way that your culture and your language does things is the default, and everything is going to be like that. But the more you learn about different cultures and different languages, the more you realize, oh, there's far more diversity around the world and in different, you know, social situations than I could have ever imagined, just as like one person sitting on my own. Yeah, I think a really good example of this is I got in an argument with somebody who argued that kissing was universally romantic, right? They were trying to argue that this was a human universal. I think something like a quarter of human cultures view kissing as romantic. Many of them view it as gross. Anyway, the number of things that are true human universals is extremely small, and if you think that it is very large, may I recommend that you spend some time learning about other cultures. Anyway, moving on. And this is sort of a, collection of papers in the conference. And we spent a lot of time talking about them here. So I'm actually just gonna post the link in the chat if you wanna try it out. If you want to look through and read some of these papers. Bjorn says, I'd imagine translating the new genders is tough, especially for languages like German, where you have pretty difficult noun conjugation. Yes, definitely. Yep. I feel like there's a different term than conjugation when it's nouns. I'm pretty sure that conjugation is for verbs and declension is for nouns. Maybe you can also conjugate nouns. I've never learned German. I've tried for a little bit and then I stopped trying because learning languages is rough for me. Anyway, so discussion of different types of, ongoing work on this particular problem, which I think is really interesting. So give the thread a shot. It's sort of like a super short little, discussion of each of these research papers. And then also they've linked the research papers themselves, so you can go check them out. All right, next one. Maybe I will spend less time talking on this. On this one. Doesn't seem likely though. So this is interesting work. So this is I don't know if he's still a student or if he's finished his degree. But thesis review, probably finished would be my guess, but I don't know for sure. But the sort of general idea of this research program is to do natural language generation, but from knowledge bases, right? So knowledge bases are not unstructured. They have inherent explicit computational structure, which, you know, has defined the relationship between things. They're graphs. They're graphs. Usually they're structured so that the nodes are items or objects, and then the edges are relationships. I'm sure there are other ways to structure them, but those are the ones that I've used so far. And using those to control the output of language models, which I thought was particularly interesting. So I'll pop the link to this in the chat as well. And there's also, you know, obviously here a couple of papers. I don't know if these are preprints or if these have been accepted anywhere. But if you're interested in this sort of work, I think it might be interesting. Hello, AM, welcome. Choo-poo, pop that in the chat. Pop that in the chat. There we go. All right. Next up, oh, so this one is by Joseph Fruwald, who I want to say was at the University of Birmingham. I actually don't know where Joseph is right now. I'm pretty sure he's not in the UK anymore. I'm pretty sure he's back in the US. Anyway, a linguist who has a, you know, pretty good blog post on reading papers and like a really pretty format here to sort of like pull apart all of the things that Joseph is thinking about and annotating when reading these papers. So, and then sort of like an extreme condension. We talked about summarization last Tuesday, 2 days ago. So I think this is an extreme example of this type of summarization. And then sort of different approaches for handling, you know, very dense academic text. So I'll pop the link to this in the chat as well, but might be useful for any of you who are reading papers, or especially if you're new to reading papers. Is Rachel pronounced Rachel? It is. The alternative being Raquel. Yeah, I sometimes get like Rachel as a pronunciation. Yeah, it's Rachel. It's just spelled like Michael is how I usually tell people. Yeah, but I mean, it comes from Hebrew, right? And in Hebrew orthography, as with many Semitic languages and Middle Eastern languages in general, the vowels aren't specified because you don't need to, because they will be filled in through a process called vowel harmony. So Turkish is very famous for having vowel harmony, where based on sort of the rest of the sentence and words, speaking of, you know, declension and morphology and agreement, you sort of like decide what the vowels in a word should be based on the rest of the context in which language is being used. And there is some information about them, but it's usually underspecified, right? So, and this example may not be right, but like, pretty sure Turkish doesn't have tensing. So they may know like it's going to be a front vowel. So it will be either E or A, which are both vowels said with the tongue root pushed forward towards the front of the mouth. But you don't know which one it is until you look at the whole sentence and see sort of that pattern of vowels. So maybe they're either all high vowels. So it would be like E, U, or they're all low vowels. So it'd be like A, throughout the sentence. So it sort of has this like, if you read a lot of Anglo-Saxon poetry, it has that sort of similar rhyming structure where the focus is really on the vowel sounds. But in languages like Turkish, that is inherent in the language structure itself, and it doesn't come from it doesn't only appear when people are making artistic choices, right? So it's not like consonants in English poetics. Wow, that was a big tangent too. Sorry, I'm very distractible today. But yes, Hector, hello, good to see you. Yeah, so just a good reference for reading papers and sort of ideas for looking up words. And then this Stochastic Parrots paper is also a good one to read if you haven't already. So helpful example paragraph for us. And then this I thought was super interesting. So this is sort of tech ethics research, but also it uses NLP methods. So if you're not familiar with Palantir, it's a company founded by, I'm going to double check it, that I'm saying the right word and not the wrong word, because sometimes I misremember people's names. And yes, it is, absolutely. So this is a company run by Peter Thiel, who usually I sort of joke about having like a list of companies that I think should not exist, and Palantir is definitely on that list. And generally people aren't on that list because, you know, I like to believe that people have changed, but some people have done so much harm in the world. I'm not saying that I don't want them to exist, but, you know, maybe they should take like a little vacation and you just have a nice time not interacting with the rest of the world for just a little bit. Take a little break. Think about what they've done. Anyway, so it's a surveillance company, and they don't tell you what they do, but you are definitely giving them money if you are a, you know, citizen of the United States, whether you want to or not. And they supply information technology solutions for data integrations and tracking to police and government agencies, humanitarian organizations, and corporations. So yes, huge surveillance company. They've got your data. There's nothing you can do about it. Maybe if you're in Europe, you could do like a GDPR complaint, but I kind of doubt it. And they don't tell you what they do as a member of the general public, even though, again, they are, you know, very happily taking public money. So the thing that they're doing basically is that they are pulling up patents, which, if you're not familiar with patents, I feel like most people are familiar with patents, but basically it's a document saying like, hey, I'm doing this. No one else can do this way. And you have to prove that like it's sufficiently different from the ways that other people did it, and they eventually expire. But they are public, right? Because you have to make it public so that people know that, hey, you can't do that. I'm doing that. Anyway, and they are using these patents as a data source to try and figure out what this extremely secretive company is doing. And they're using topic modeling to do it, which I thought was, again, an interesting approach, an interesting data source, and obviously a question of public interest. And they're treating them as, you know, they're treating them as a structured data source for this additional sort of discovery process, which again, I just thought was a cool approach, interesting research project. And can we display this table? There we go. They've done some, wow, that's very small. And they've done some topic modeling. Can you see some of that? You can see some of that. Here, I'll move myself. On some of these, so things like identifying data mismatches, associations, and their relationships was one of the topics they extracted, memory processing and storage devices, selecting customizable data objects in graphs with nodes and edges. So, you know, a lot of the sort of graph work that's been done has been done on social networks. So like identifying, you know, all of your close friends based on your social information, modeling and linking ontologies, entities, objects, relationships, and properties related to people's events and things, segmentation and partitioning objects using sets, claims, time series, and values, provenance, receipts, and verification of claims, descriptions, and disclosures, logical rule-based scoring and analyzing with alerts. So I'm not saying you should do what Palantir does. In fact, I'm explicitly saying don't do what they do. However, I think it is often a surprise to people who are new to the field how common rule-based methods are in day-to-day work. And here is a not an example I'm recommending you emulate, but another example of that being the case. Communication and notification with messages, visualization and process and flowcharts, figures and diagrams, and then medical and healthcare fraud claims. So just sort of the general topics of what they're up to, what they're doing. And again, I just thought it was an interesting paper. It's open access, which is great, of general public interest, particularly if you are in the global north. And yeah, an interesting survey methodology, or interesting, research methodology. So I will pop this in as well. Hello, Chronos Zero. Welcome to the chat. Alexi says, my grandma used to Eskimo kiss me. Don't think people do it anymore so much. Yeah, so it was, I believe that sort of like in Inuit communities, it's still common, but I don't know so much about other places. It's never been something that's been a part of my culture or sort of ethnic heritage, but yeah. Yeah. Dana says, I'd love to see a list of businesses you think shouldn't exist. Good way to frame my job search of who not to apply to. I mean, the sort of the Cliff Notes version is, oh, that's right, I was popping the link to the paper in the chat if you want to see it. The Cliff Notes version is if all of their money is made from surveillance and eroding privacy, maybe not a good place to work. Generally, like, is this company making the world a measurably worse place? Other good metrics: will they take the business of avowed white supremacists and take their money and platform them? Probably not good. I mean, I am, as a person living in the United States, not delighted by the way that policing continues to shape our society. So I would say generally working with police is also something that I would personally avoid. But yeah, I think sort of deciding where you do and don't want to work is going to be eventually a very personal decision. And I don't want to tell you, like, right, like I have my list and I'm sure that your list would be slightly different, right? Like, it's sort of like a nebulous cloud, right? It's not like a list that I keep in a notebook and I'm like, how dare. But I don't know. Maybe at some point I'll do, here, I'll put it on my my to-dos for something to talk about at some point. Yeah, and like I said, it's generally companies, it's not people. It's this one, yes. All right, next up. So this was a really interesting thread, and I will say, first of all, I am not a computer vision researcher. I'm not deep in the literature. I've mentioned this a lot. I think those of you who watch the channel regularly know this, but I thought this was an interesting thread because I remember when this sort of like adversarial examples. Yes, you're very loud. I remember when these adversarial examples were like front page news, and I sort of assumed that, the computer vision community had been working on them a lot and it was a major research topic. And based on this thread, maybe I was wrong in that assumption. So the sort of general idea, you might have seen the stop sign one where, a pixel level attack was done. So for human, these both look like pandas, but because of the specific noise added, the resulting image is incorrectly classified as a gibbon. It's a type of ape. I'm pretty sure they're apes, with 99.3% confidence. So this is an attack to make this model wrong in a specific controlled way. And yes, there definitely has been some work, particularly in adversarial training and randomized smoothing, so different types of defenses. But the general question of the thread was, have we reached a satisfactory level of robustness, right? So how well is this going to generalize to a lot of different cases? And with L infinity, L peanut perturbation, I don't know how to say this. So adding some degree of noise, which is measurable, I've made it bigger. The best empirical defense attains 38% robust accuracy and just 68% standard accuracy. So basically, if you add noise, the models get substantially worse than sort of the baseline regular model, which can't handle these adversarial attacks. And the sort of the trade-off is only, you know, a quarter to a third of these attacks are actually being correctly picked up, which is not great news. And again, I don't work in the field, but just as a consumer, not the best numbers. You know, if you're like, our malware detector detects 40% of malware, I'd be like, okay, that's less than half. I would like maybe something that does a little bit of a better job than that. And obviously this is a difficult problem, but it's an update for me, so maybe it's an update for you. And then since 2020, it seems the robustness results have basically been saturated. Even using additional data doesn't seem to help much. So this is from Robust Bench on CFAR 10 with this measure of perturbation. Maybe someone has told me what it is. Hey, old player. Am says, here's other distraction. Structured text can be both partitioned into chapters, paragraphs, etc., and annotated with e.g. NER, named entity recognition, and part of speech, right? Yes, it could be either. So basically, it is unstructured text if it is just a flat text file, just like wall of text, basically. Yep. So structured text is overloaded depending on context and guessing ability. Yeah, a little bit, but it's something that changes have been made to, so it's not just a flat text file, wall of text, which if you look at some of like the older text files in you know, older data sets, that's what they are. They're just like a zip drive file. They are a folder with a bunch of flat text files in them. Or if you're really unlucky, one flat text file in it, and you have to figure it out from there. So Alexi says, adversarial attacks using makeup against facial recognition is an interesting thing. The future fashion is going to be wild. Yes, definitely. I mean, the kind of problem with that is given the super lax protection of people's images being added to it. If you post it online at all, the likelihood that it can be quickly folded into the next round of training is very high. So I feel like that's an arms race that folks are... My money is not on the human there, just because there's a limit of what you can do with makeup. But, yep. And then just sort of discussing the sort of like, kind of yikesy results about how the robustness is not, you know, increasing significantly. There's an additional hidden assumption between all these results that the threat model used by the adversary should match the threat model used in the defense. This is never a realistic assumption, as we studied in 2020, shameless advertisement of our work. Which, yeah, I think that's a reasonable assumption. Hackers are not there to be polite to you. If there is a mismatch between the attack and defense threat models, the robustness results drop even further. For example, an adversarially trained model against, when evaluated against imperceptible spatial attacks, achieves basically 0% accuracy. So yeah, I would say this is very much not a solved problem, is my understanding, which is, again, a little bit of a surprise for me because it's been around for, you know, almost a decade at this point. And I'm not in this literature, but I sort of assumed that they were way ahead of where we were in the language side of things because it was discovered earlier, and there's been, you know, lots of money poured into it. And I think that it probably is definitely still ahead of where we are with text. I think that the sort of text perturbation attacks, we just are understudied, dramatically understudied. But yeah, 0% accuracy feels very bad to me, you know, just my gut instinct. Some folks argue that in industry, not a lot of people care about adversarial robustness, thus there is no need to worry about this problem. And yet people build things with biometrics. Although adversarial robustness may not be a big deal today, IMO it will be when we have millions of self-driving cars moving around our neighborhoods. I mean, frankly, hopefully this won't happen. Like, just in terms of continuing to make the world a place where humans can live in, I would love to see not actually that. But, you know, adversarial vulnerability may not be a disease itself, but it's a symptom of a big issue in current AI models. In most cases, these models rely on noisy input patterns instead of meaningful features and attributes in their predictions. And this, I would say, is absolutely the case in NLP, particularly if you're doing large language models. In sort of the things that get a lot of research done on them and have like big flashy headlines, I would say that that's not necessarily the case of sort of like day-to-day language technology engineering work. I would say a lot of the day-to-day language technology engineering work does, you know, do meaningful feature, you know, engineering and attribute extraction. So I think that we're actually a little bit better in terms of doing this in NLP than they are in computer vision. But also, you know, NLP has been around since the 60s and, you know, commercially viable since definitely the 80s was sort of when a lot of NLP stuff started to be, you know, out there. When was was it the Selectric typewriter that had, you know, spell check as part of it? Like a good example of a commercial NLP technology. So we have these sort of like this legacy of rule-based systems and these tasks. Most of the things that people are doing today are tasks that have been around for decades, and we also have other ways of doing more cheaply and I would say probably more robustly in this particular use of robustness. At least cheaper at runtime, not necessarily cheaper to build. Just to be clear what my distinction is there. So I think that it's not true of all of NLP that this is the case. However, if you're only using large language models, it is, thankfully, for pretty much anything you'd use large language model for in a commercial application, you also have other options that do not have those drawbacks. This is also why we observe that model performance drops quite a bit when evaluating in out of distribution situations without any adversarial noise. This is still a problem in NLP, and I would say sort of one of the biggest things that you can do in your own work is to make sure that the text you are training on is very similar from the text or language data. It doesn't necessarily have to be text that you'll be seeing in production. The first step of serving a problem is to admit its existence. I think it's time to admit current AI models are not reliable. I think that's a little bit overbroad. Like I said, I think a lot of work in NLP is like fine if boring, which I think it's still my Twitter tagline is I want things to be boring. Yeah. And start rethinking the entire design, training, evaluation pipeline of AI systems. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll call less stuff AI, and also I'm fine with that. But that's sort of the general trend. Oh, I never moved myself back. There I go. Yeah. 9 says there are goggles now that infrared now. Give me a second to read. There is a goggle that emits near infrared rays to thwart facial recognition systems. My God. Yeah, your writing is fine. I'm just having a hard time reading. Oh, that's cool. I'd like to learn more about that. AM says, I think Roberta is self-trained, not just by predicting messed words, but also corrupted words. Could that be considered an adversary for text? Interesting. So, no. So adversarial attacks on text. Actually, I have a video on this, actually, as it turns out. Happens that. I'll pop that in the chat for you real quick. But no, to be sort of blunt about it, that is being able to handle what's called noisy text. Here you go. So the video is called 5 Types of Adversarial Attacks on Large Language Models. Brett says machine learning is a better descriptor than AI. Yeah, there's still, like I said, there's a lot of rule-based systems in production. You have interacted with a lot of them as a consumer, even if you don't necessarily realize that you have. So being able to handle variation in text, particularly variation away from sort of a formal written domain, right? Like the Wall Street Journal, big corpus, people have used it for ages. A lot of foundational NLP work is on the Wall Street Journal. Does that do the models trained with that foundational NLP work as well for Twitter threads? No, because those are different types of language. So being able to handle sort of like corrupted words, I don't even like that, right? Because usually when people are producing language, they are producing it for a specific audience, right? So in this case, I'm talking to y'all. I assume, for example, that you may not share a lot of like cultural context with me necessarily, but you probably share a lot of technical context with me. So I try to be like careful about like, okay, if I'm bringing up something that's like culturally relevant, I'll try to like loop you all in. Because again, I don't want to assume that, I don't want to assume, but I am assuming that sort of you're here because you care about language technology and you know at least a little bit about it. Otherwise, I don't think you'd still be here 45 minutes into a stream about some nerd stuff. So the language that I produce in this context is going to be very different than the language that I produce in other contexts, and that variation is not necessarily intentional, but it is purposeful, right? So it's being done for a reason. And being able to handle language that's been produced for a variety of reasons is a necessary quality of these sorts of models. Adversarial attacks for text would be like targeted data poisoning. I don't know. I don't know how well equipped we are to handle that. I think perhaps not very. Adversarial attacks for text, specifically for large language models, would be things like triggers, which cause the model to produce language output that is undesirable for the program designers. So no, I think that sort of those changes to things like Roberta are to be able to handle a wider variety of legitimate text inputs. They are not there to prevent adversaries from misappropriating the models for their own ends, basically. Yep. Brett says IR LEDs on glasses. Infrared LEDs. Light emitting diodes. I assume y'all know what LEDs are. That seems like a safe bet. Anyway, yeah, so interesting points. Kind of a bummer that has not been as big of a research, that not as much progress has been made there as I would have hoped. I don't necessarily know that it hasn't been a research focus. I guess mostly what I see of computer vision are like, we've created this thing with clear malicious uses, but we're using it to make cute content on Twitter that people engage with so that we can improve our, company's value. Which I find frustrating. Also, on the sort of research question mark front, there is a new data set that's been released by Alan AI. Sorry, let me scooch that over so you can actually read all the relevant text. It's on Hugging Face. And the first thing that I noticed when I looked at this is that it is missing metadata, which this is a pet peeve of mine. If you are, going to be releasing a data set, especially and then making a big deal about it, the metadata better be pristine. I better be able to show this to Hammurabi and he's got to be like, I know it's in that data set because it is so well documented. Presumably if you translated the text into a language Hammurabi read. Presumably he was literate. Yeah. I guess it was a scribe culture. Anyway, I just picked a historical figure that I thought would be, particularly helpful. But yes, I would like more information here. But there we go. And it's a matched text data set. So this would be useful for things like machine translation. And I will say, I do not know what the quality of the multilingual data is like. Interesting. What does LATN mean? Is that Latin? That must be the data source, I'm guessing. But it also looks like it could be... Okay, sorry. So I'll just tell you what I'm looking at and thinking instead of just thinking it quietly to myself. So like this is probably Amharic Ethiopian, and this is AFR LATN. And I don't know this language code off the top of my head, but I'm not entirely sure what LATN would stand for here. Maybe Latin America. So maybe it's sort of like generally where this language is used. So I guess this would be like English is spoken in Latin America, but like Ewe and Fon are definitely not. If they are spoken in Latin America, the language populations would be very small. Those are languages. Those are languages of Western Africa. And like this one, something Arabic, I'm guessing, KNC. So maybe these are like the sources they're getting the data from, would be my guess. Like this is probably Kiswahili. Okay, so this is probably Tigaran from Ethiopia again. Interesting. Okay, so I don't know. Oh, it's the writing system. All right, I figured it out. Yeah. Okay, so this is in Latin script. That makes so much more sense. So this is going to be an Arabic script. This is going to be in Ethiopian script, which I don't know if there's a specific name of that script. I do know it's very, very old. As writing systems go. Okay, so that's the script that they're in, and this is the language code. Got it. I figured it out. So this would be Devangari? Again, I apologize for saying it bad. I know some of you probably use it as a writing system. Okay, Cyrillic. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I figured it out. Yeah, and then folks are letting me know in the chat after I figured it out. I apologize. Yeah, sorry, MB Timothy says open source language learning AI I would recommend. So what resource, an open source resource for learning machine learning techniques for language data, I feel like is what you're asking. I haven't done them, but the new Fast AI course sounds like it might be good, so potentially want to check out. Yeah, thanks folks. Alexi says, I remember one Kaggle competition where a lot of people found out that one of the spacey default English models doesn't do a good job when presented with a bunch of exclamation points. Noted. Okay, so this is a lot of language pairs. Again, I don't have the ability to sort of validate the quality of these language pairs, but I would absolutely, double check them before you use them. But here we have a example of two languages I am not familiar with. This, I would guess, is a Bantu language, but I don't know what it would be, just sort of like looking at it. And this I don't know. And it has been crawled, so use at your own risk and definitely double check the quality of the language pairs you are interested in first. Okay, then here's the sources of all of that data. Web crawls. Okay, so it's going to be very heterogeneous, what's in it. And it has not been human annotated at all. So, yes, but you are compiling existing resources? I guess it's nice to have them all sort of in a parallel way. Wow. Well, sorry, I'm just reading this, and each of these things makes me less and less comfortable with recommending somebody use this data set. It exists. Anyway, practical stuff. First up, so this is going to be going on in now. It's currently happening. It's starting today, if you are interested. And I believe it's going to be in Spanish. Spanish, but it's the International Forum on Indigenous Linguistics. So if any of you are working with Indigenous languages, I think it's online, and also speak Spanish. Yeah, it's online. You can check it out. Might be useful for some of you. Oh, I just stuck myself in the eye. God, I wish I'd had coffee. Anyway, so yes, could be interested for those of you working on Indigenous languages, speaking of low resource languages, might be something cool to check out. And then this I thought was just really interesting. So some of you may be familiar of sort of the practice in data science of when you have a missing value, you just pick an unreasonable default that would like show up as an outlier and use that as the default when the value is missing. And in this case, they did it with voter data. And as a result, a lot of people who are looking at that voting data, most government data is, public domain and in theory available to the public. Whether or not you can actually get it and whether or not you can actually get it for free is a second question. And because the people who were reading through this voter data to sort of like prove election fraud, which they were unable to prove because that was not supported by the evidence, found, that a lot of voters had the same phone number. And this phone number is, of course, the default phone number if a phone number is not provided, right? And a lot of these voters used this registration date in January 1st, 1918. And that is, not the date that those people registered to vote. It is a placeholder for missing values. I think it's just a sort of interesting example of the cultural impact of Cognition says, oh no, yeah, of the cultural impact of the, the legacy of the data, right? So this is happening because of a change in the way the data was handled and processed, and also the choices made and how to represent that data. And I think I mentioned earlier when talking about sort of like anthropology or even on Tuesday when we sort of talked about what you assume would be a reasonable default, it's not necessarily clear to other people why that decision was made. And yeah, anyway, just a fun data science, interesting data science news story that jumped out at me. Oh no. There we go. So this is, if you're interested in subscribing to the Substack, it is who is Nnamdi? Apologies again if I am saying that incorrectly. .substack.com. And again, just sort of on the general, I'll move myself. No, I want to move me. There we go. On the general topic of interesting data science projects. So this was a longitudinal analysis trying to determine, did COVID as a global event hurt software and technology companies? And based on this analysis, the answer is yes. So the sort of looking at the trend of all software technology companies after March 2020, over time, you can see that the trend is to go down, and it's sort of continuing to go down. And of course, other things have happened since then, but it's just sort of an interesting inflection point. I thought it was a really nice visualization as well to sort of show the issue there. So yeah. Alexi says, one IP to location mapping company used values close to an average location when they were unsure. So let's say if they couldn't tell the IP location but knew it was somewhere in the US, they put it in like the middle of Kansas. Yeah, I've also seen that before. And it usually shows up when you're doing a close analysis of the data, but yeah. Cognition says, gotta wonder if there's any reasonable way to encode a null value that wouldn't have set off red flags for them though. Even just a blank value that might look just as suspicious, or NaN. Yeah, it's a great question. My guess is, and again, just like I'm sort of guessing, is that something in the data processing line couldn't handle missing data. So it was just added and couldn't handle missing data that was not of the same class as the missing data, which is why, a fake phone number and a fake date were used. And I mean, like, I've done that occasionally, if sort of the cleaning the missing ended up with a too small of a data set. So I get it. Yep. Oh yeah, the thing where like there's a, yeah, the geographical center of the US. Yep. Also, sort of on the general FYI, so if you're using an app and there is a link in the app and you click on it and it opens up the in-app browser, it sounds like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok for sure will just keylog anything you put in that in-app browser. So maybe don't do it, and maybe, you know, let your friends and family know. Don't do it. So I imagine that would include things like, you know, sensitive personal information, you know, date of birth, address, credit card number, passwords, all that stuff. So just don't do it. Yeah. Cognition says, when the auditors of your data are motivated to find suspicious anomalies, ... Yep. They'll latch on to anything. I imagine if it wasn't that, they'd be like, these people share the exact same birth date and registered at the same time, and it's like they're twins and they went together or something. Yeah, it's I think there's a pretty strong human bias to make the facts fit your theory. And it's hard to get around that. Oh, I posted that twice. All right. Speaking of limitations of systems, so this is the same Joseph Foucault who, University of Kentucky, yeah, who did the paper reading guide that we talked about earlier. Sorry, he's at the University of Kentucky. I remember he was at Birmingham, maybe, for a while. And he has a little task for GPT-3 to provide syntactic judgments on different sentences. So basically, there's this premise in linguistics that people will just sort of like automatically know whether or not a sentence is good based on their internal grammar. And by asking people questions about whether sentences are good, you can get an information about that internal grammar that you're trying to model, which is particularly in generative linguistics and that tradition, an important part of the field. So just some examples here. I've done my homework. My homework has been done. I am done my homework. For me, that's ungrammatical. For some people, it's fine. My homework is been done. I'm all ready for school. I have done all my homework. I have all done my homework. I have been done my homework for a while now. So just a bunch of different sentences. And then GPT-3, he asked to give, acceptability judgments. So he primed the first 10, which is quite generous, right? This is a long prompt, and then got machine judgments for the last 6. Specifically looking for the judgments for a speaker from the Philadelphia area, which this is a, grammatical feature associated with. And as you can see, the error rate was 50%. So basically just guessing, which, yeah, I thought was particularly interesting because I would have guessed, given that GPT-3 has, is doing statistical learning and has a lot of examples, that it is potentially the case that it would have been able to do this. I wouldn't have been shocked, but wasn't. So yeah, just sort of interesting. All right. Also, a volunteering opportunity. So the Widening NLP Workshop, formerly the Women in NLP Workshop, but they sort of expanded to focus on more things, is looking for co-organizers, so chairs. It's a volunteer opportunity. It's a 2-year thing. And yeah, if you are interested, here is the application and deadline. And it's, if you are not a scholar working in the field, probably you're not going to care that much. But if you are, this is really a good opportunity to do some service. Also, I've talked to the workshop. I know some of the folks who were previously chairs, and so far it's been a pretty cool thing. So if you're interested. Also, on practical stuff, OpenAI has reduced their prices by more than 50%, which is pretty interesting. And in some cases, 66%, because that's a third. Yeah. Brett says, off topic, will you benefit from President Biden's decision on student loan forgiveness? I will actually not. And the for personal reasons that are a little bit painful to talk about. But I was fortunate enough to go to college, and as part of that, I did not end up taking out any loans. I don't super want to get into it, but yes, I did not have any student loan debt. But I am delighted. I wish that they'd gone a little bit farther. But for those of you who haven't heard, there's an executive order reducing non-Pell federal student loan debt by $10K, Pell grants by $20K, sorry, Pell loans. So the Pell is a program for low-income students. And also capping the maximum repayment length and percentage of income, which is also going to really, really help folks, which is great. Yeah, student debt in this country is wild. It's absolutely unbelievable. So yeah, thanks for asking, Brett. Yeah, anyway, so yeah, if you're using OpenAI, it's cheaper now. And then this I thought was kind of cool, and I think for those of you who've been in software for a while, it's probably not going to be a huge surprise for you. But there was this global time use survey that was looking at different software engineers across the industry, and found that on average, developers code less than an hour per day, about 52 minutes per day, based on data from 250,000 developers. And that was specifically time spent actively writing or editing code in an IDE, which I thought was interesting, but also, again, not super surprising to me as someone who's been in the industry for a while, and something that, I think oftentimes doesn't necessarily get reflected well in metrics like amount of time spent or number of lines written, is that it is far more important to write the right code than it is to write a large amount of the wrong code. And in fact, people who write a lot of code often end up harming a team down the line, especially since, again, in my experience, those folks are not often the best at documenting their work or aligning with the rest of the team or talking to product managers. Just sort of a general pattern of behavior some of you may have run into in the past as well, because a lot of particularly more junior folks have this idea that, like, software engineer, I'm going to sit and write code all the time, which I think is not particularly realistic. And also, the more senior you get, the more time you spend sort of like figuring out what is the right code to write, and that involves looping in a lot of people, a lot of meetings, reading and writing documents, meeting with your team, mentoring, etc. So yeah, not super surprising to me, but I think for a lot of folks who are newer to the field, it might be. Cognition says, yeah, that tracks. The metric sounds like a bigger problem than it is, to be fair. Yeah. Yes, I'm not saying you don't write code. I am saying it is like, it's like saying like chefs only spend 1 hour a day cooking, when cooking is like flambeing, right? Or like a cooking is just the final plating, and it doesn't pay attention to the amount of time that's spent doing like planning the menu, ordering the produce, testing recipes, chopping, cooking, we're like chopping and like arranging things, setting schedules, briefing the front of the house staff about what's on the menu, updating things as things change throughout the day. And like, yeah, they don't spend that much time like actually sauteing and then plating as like the whole, but it is the ability to do that as a reflection of a lot of other time spent on necessary tasks. Nine Gaming says, why don't they reduce exponentially rising tuition costs? That is a great question. And there are a lot of factors, and the main reason is that they feel like they don't have to. So we've also talked quite a bit on the channel, especially recently, about how academics, like teachers, professors, research assistants, are also paid very little. So most of the money that students pay in tuition, a lot of it goes to the college sports programs. And the sort of general idea is that these sports programs are investments for the college and they make that money back, which sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. A lot of it is spent on sort of like marketing the college. And also, many colleges are actually basically investment funds that happen to have some buildings that students are in occasionally. And sort of the majority of the money just sort of sits there making more money. And I would say that fundamentally the reason is that universities in the United States, community colleges accepted, are not primarily institutions of education anymore. And that's an issue. Like, if they were, right, and education was valued as a vocation, and educators were paid living wages, not even just well, but like enough money that they weren't having to rely on food banks for food, that's not an exaggeration. I'd certainly be happier with the situation, but yep. Also, college presidents make a lot of money. And basically, it's the same thing that's happening in the UK now. Colleges and universities are being treated as businesses rather than, you know, a public good where the good is an educated population and the creation and curation and preservation of knowledge. Yep. Anyway. I thought this was really interesting. So Destin Ingram works on open source like security stuff at Google. I'm pretty sure still doing that. Yeah. Open source security team. Yep. Also a PSF director and maintainer of PyPI, or PyP as some people call it. And just sort of a really interesting discussion of how malware on PyPI is detected and removed. Alexi says, sad face. Yep. Brett says, totally, and lots of resources. I dream of the same class sizes, but 2 teachers per class. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't it be? And it's like every level of the United States, of education in the United States, from, you know, before school starts all the way up to post-secondary education. Educators themselves are not well paid. Let me put it that way. I think something like, here in Virginia in particular, the state I'm in, there is an enormous problem where I think something like 3 to 5% of all teaching positions for the upcoming school year, which is starting, you know, this month, next month, are not filled. And the reason is that they don't pay people. I mean, that's part of it. And also, anyway, that's a big part of it. We actually have a budget surplus this year, and the governor does not think that it should go to paying, you know, the teachers who are dramatically underpaid, but instead as tax breaks to people with money. But anyway, malware checks. I got distracted by Virginia politics. Ooh, sorry. So this is in response to this company, ChainGuard, making the software supply chain secure by default. Software security, cybersecurity is their Twitter bio. And they claim that using an open source benchmark data set to assess current PyPI checks, our analysis found false positive rates as high as 33%, right? So I believe that means that of the packages that are checked, 33% were incorrectly flagged as malware. So the system discussed here isn't used on PyPI. Dustin is clarifying. It was you know, proof of concept, and it has false positives, it has false negatives, but also it's really difficult to improve. And just sort of more discussion. It uses a pattern matching engine. So again, rule-based system. They're out there. But of course, you know, Python is a very flexible language, and just checking for patterns is not sufficient. So as a result, PyPI pretty much does nothing themselves, and a lot of the malware detection is done by other concerned, parties, and they are all sort of working in cooperate together but separately. They're all doing the same task, and some of them are open source, these tools, some of them aren't, and then basically if malware is found, they notify PyPI using the information provided by the repository. So what does PyPI do if they're not running an automatic malware detector and they're sort of relying on this open source network of malware detecting organizations? So one, this is what Dustin is recommending they do. Better tooling for reporting and removing malware, right? So easier to flag, easier to take it down. Externally published data set of malware taken down. So basically to let folks know, hey, this is what we removed so that models can be trained on it to detect it better. And then namespaces. So typo squatting is a pretty big issue, which basically it's instead of like numpy, it would be numpy, where two of the tokens are switched, something that people are likely to do at some point. And when you incorrectly import this library due to a typo, the library that you actually import is malware. So yes, definitely an issue. Anyway, what's it going to take? And the answer is money and people's time, like pretty much anything. And they are looking for funders. So I'll pop this link in the chat as well. Whoop, there we go. In case you are interested in maybe pointing it to your company and being like, hey, wouldn't that be great? Cognition says about the coders spend 1 hour a day writing code. A lot of the work is figuring out whether the code you want to write is the right code. Yup. Hey, Robbie. All right. And then this is going to be happening next Wednesday, or I guess this Wednesday, because on the 31st, Emily and Alex are going to be doing a Twitch stream, actually, about reading a blog post that's full of just like AI hype and like lying to people, and they're going to be talking about it together. So if you are interested, that should be a fun time. And I think 1 p.m. Pacific is the same time as this stream usually happens, but it'll be on a Wednesday. So yeah, I'll pop that in the chat as well in case you want to check it out. Robbie says you can share your code through GitHub, no need to develop a whole package. I would say that it is less secure to use random GitHub code than a package. There are many good reasons to package code, but not all code needs to be packaged. Sorry, this has been playing, apparently, for a while. Can I get back mine? No. Yes, there we go. Woohoo. Okay. Also, I was on a podcast that also has a video. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I've added this to my playlist that's like Rachel's podcasts and Tank and stuff. And also thanks to Luke if you're watching for the sort of introduction. So it's a SEO ranking podcast, and yeah, we talked about a lot of stuff. I had a good time, and hopefully if you watch it, you enjoy it. All right. Marmy says, I don't think so. Well, I mean, you're entitled to your opinion. And also, speaking of women in data science, I guess that's me. There was this article that somebody pointed me to that includes a lot of people that like I really recommend following. Like Jenny's great, Meg's great, Emily's great, Mina's great. I'm pretty cool, I guess. And I don't necessarily know all of these people. Data Science Renee is amazing, but like Chelsea is fantastic. A lot of these people I do know, and I would definitely recommend following. So I'll pop this link in the chat as well if you want to, add some people to your Twitter following if you do it. Oh, thank you, Luke. I hope they enjoyed it. Doop, doop, doop. All right, and that is it for the practical stuff. On to politics. Not a whole bunch of stuff today, and also very US focused. It just sort of happened that way. I do try to, include more geographic variety in what I talk about, but it didn't happen today. Oh, excuse me. Actually, it's been an hour and a half. They typoed my name. Oh, is it misspelled? Let me double check. Oh, so it is. It's fine. I think it's important for me to get other people's names right, but it does not matter to me in the least if you misspell my name. Not least because I'm still very findable even with the typo. So, yep. Who is the person at the top? Jenny Bryant. She, I think, yeah, she's working in our studio now, but she used to be at the University of British Columbia, I think, in the statistics department, and she's just like a fabulous educator. Her guide on how to get started with Git is fantastic. One of the best Git guides out there for my money. So, I mean, it's free, so no money, but I would still recommend it. Yeah. Bobby said, we just had a whole segment on the origin of the A in your name. How dare they? Oh, it's perfectly fine. I do not care. Yeah, it just doesn't bother me. And I'm trying to decide if I want another coffee or not, and whether or not I should do a little pause in the middle of the stream to go get coffee. And I think no. I'm gonna power through. All right. First up. Oh yeah, this whole thing. So the former, I think it was head of security previously the company's head of security. Peter Mudge Zatko, much as like his hacker name, basically has been talking and doing some whistleblowing about the security practices of Twitter, which are pretty hair-raising. You can read the article. There's lots of articles on this. You can just find it if you're interested. Some of the particular biggest problems are that there were huge problems, and that's not Mudge, that's Jack Dorsey. The board didn't care, or like he was told not to tell the board. And among those problems, some of the ones that I think are the most worrying is that there were very limited protections for user data. Brett says, 82 minutes in, maybe okay for coffee. You only know Hadley. Yeah, I mean, Hadley is great, but Jenny is also very good. And it's there's lots of fabulous folks on Twitter who do use R and talk about R. So if it's a language you're interested in, great learning resource. But yes, so this is also, it seems like, been the case for multiple governments where they, got access to user data and then potentially used it to, harass and target individuals. Not great. And in this particular case, it's, the Indian government. I guess this is actually not US news, but yeah, potentially a bad time. Also, and I put this under politics because I think it's like the topic is politics, but it is, I think, also a very good sort of walkthrough of looking at surprising findings. It says, in general, I think it's good practice when you find something surprising to really dig into it, particularly if it's something surprising that you're happy to have found, because I think it's, we talked a little bit like there's that human bias to fit the things you find into your theories. But, it's good scientific practice to be just like paranoid. Don't trust anything. Always be, could something else have caused this? And I think this is a good example of sort of a walkthrough of what that process can look like. So this is a graph that's a little bit hard to read, but basically it's looking at country level data, and it suggests that the more police per homicide there are, the fewer police killings there are, right? So this is, this axis is number of people killed by the police per million of population, and this is the number of police per homicide committed, which I think this is generally a surprising finding, right? That you would expect, given a consistent rate of likelihood of a police officer to kill somebody, then more police would result in more killings. And this sort of suggests that, like, the more of a police state you have, the less harm the police do. But a couple things that jumped out to this person is that the denominators here are not the same as well, right? So instead of saying, we're going to have the same underlying thing we're dividing by two different things, and didn't have access to the original data, but recreated it for US cities. All right, so here we have more police. So here we have police per homicide on the x-axis, and then the y-axis is the number of police killings per million people. And even without that sort of like little outlier there by 600, it does look like there's sort of a general trend. So this specific pattern was repeated, but it's a weird choice to change the denominator. So why did they use homicides to denominate police, but population to denominate police killings? In an email to me, they said it was because each measures something different. Police per homicide measures state footprint, while police killings per capita, an outcome that outrages us. I don't see this distinction. I think if a denominator is the best benchmark for one variable, it would be for both. And that's also my general intuition as well, because otherwise, right, the scale of these axes are not the same, right? Does that make sense? So sometimes by squishing things weirdly, you can get more surprising results. Does that mean I don't know if I'm saying that well. I'm sort of like imagining points moving around in my head, and I'm not doing a great job expressing it. But when both measures were used with the same denominator, right? So killings per homicide, and then police killings per, I guess, non-police homicide, and then police per homicide, you see the opposite pattern, right? So there are more killings if you have more police. And then similarly, if you look at cities' population, which in this case I would agree is a more intuitive benchmark. That's probably what I would have picked in this case. We also observe a positive correlation. More police are related to more police killings, with a very it seems to be a very robust correlation, let me put it that way. And then other related literature also finds that same, in the field, finds that same pattern. So this pattern is not the same pattern as found by other researchers looking at the same thing. But if you change the denominator so that they're both the same denominator, you don't find that pattern. In fact, you find the opposite pattern, and that's the pattern that's been found by other research. And to be completely fair, Rend in this case did not have the same cross-national data, but at least with US cities, one must use inconsistent and unusual denominators to get their result. My read of the evidence is that hiring more officers will lead to more police killings, which I think is, assuming sort of a base rate of killings per police officer, which I think is a reasonable baseline assumption. To me, that feels pretty intuitive, but their figures are also on a log scale, not a linear scale, so might help to explain why these don't look quite as nice and clean. So and I will also post this link in the chat. Here you go, Brett. So bye, Am. So just, I think if a student handed me a paper with these graphs in it, I think I would have had pretty much the exact same thought process. And yeah, I think this is a good sort of like walking through of like why that's a little bit weird and like trying out different hypotheses. And, you know, for any given data set, if you do something unintuitive enough with it, you can probably find an opposite trend from the main trend that the data set shows. So yeah, no worries. Chrono Zero says, kind of suspicious about the funding for the MIT paper now, TBH. Yeah, we can check it out. Let's see. So this is from the American Journal of Law and Equality. Interesting. At least in the US, you usually put affiliation information right after, at least in NLP, you usually put affiliation information right after the authors. Oops, sorry, that's what a Creative Commons license is, not super helpful. Let's see, do they... I'm trying to see if they have their funding affiliation in the paper. They don't. Interesting. So if you have government funding in the US, again, like whenever I publish something with my, so I was in graduate school, I was a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellow, and every time I published anything, I had to say that they had given me the money for my research, basically. So yeah, question mark. It's not easily findable here that I can see. Yeah. All right. Ooh, also, we talked about this last Tuesday when we were talking about the sort of malicious uses of text, spam and annoyance. And this is going to be a huge court case. So it's against the two most prolific, I guess, architects of these spam warranty cases, which I thought was, you know, interesting. It's interesting to see how this goes. It might have sort of like potentially implications for other automated malignant uses. And something that really stuck out at me at this article was, where is it? It was how much had been lost, like how much these cost, you know, the public, basically. And let me see if I can find it. Not that one, not that one. Yes, here we go. Consumer advocacy groups say that unwanted robocalling costs Americans an estimated $30 billion a year, ranging from money lost directly through fraud to as much as $3 billion a year in lost time and nuisances. So I sort of talked about annoyances as being just sort of like a thing that people experience, but I didn't have like a good quantification of, you know, the actual material cost of nuisance stuff. And it has, you know, a cost. Yeah. Chrono Zero says, yeah, for my chemical engineering PhD, I had to disclose funding sources everywhere. Thank you for looking. Yeah, no worries. All right, so yeah, interesting case to keep an eye on. And specifically, this is being prosecuted under the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. So yeah. Also, sort of under the regulation privacy stuff, oh, I don't know, I said a bad, I'm not saying words good anymore. There was this think piece from VentureBeat that I thought was pretty interesting about why AI regulation will resemble privacy regulation. And basically it's because, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, you need data for AI, and the privacy that protects the data is also going to affect the AI legislation as well. So I thought just sort of like an interesting think piece, and it is on VentureBeat, Data Decision Makers. Also, in big court cases, this one is against Oracle, and it's a U.S. privacy class action lawsuit by So it was filed by Dr. Johnny Ryan, Senior Fellow of the Irish Council for Civil Liberties, the Director of the Center for Human Rights and Privacy, and Jennifer Jen Goldbeck, who I'll say I am a huge fan of. She's a fantastic researcher. I'd highly recommend reading her work if you're interested in sort of privacy. A professor of computer science at the University of Maryland, who say they are acting on behalf of worldwide internet users who have been subject to Oracle's privacy violations, which include amassing detailed dossiers on some 5 billion people. That's a lot of people. That's almost certainly me and all of you, because you are online watching me. So yeah, I think another really interesting case to keep an eye on. And perhaps this is obvious, but I'm not on Oracle's side on this one. I'm very much on the side of the plaintiffs. So fingers crossed. Also, like I said, if you haven't read any of Dr. Jen's Goldbeck's research, I would highly recommend it. I'm pretty sure, one sec, I'm going to look up something before I say something wrong, because I think that's important. I feel... Yes, okay. Sorry, I just wanted to double check that it was true before I said something. She also has runs a dog Twitter account for her many wonderful golden retrievers. So if you are someone who enjoys dog content on the internet, the Golden Ratio Fund 4 is also run by Dr. Goldbeck. So all around cool person. I wish them the best of luck for, you know, all of us. Cognition says, sheesh. Yep. Yeah. Oracle. What's up? I mean, I know what's up. They saw a way to make money and they took it. And then our final practical thing is also sort of on the same US government focused thing. So the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission, has sort of a new, it's not super new, but they're starting to use it more and more, penalty for companies that are collecting data illegally or storing data illegally and then using it to train machine learning algorithms. And it is that you are required to delete the data and you are required to delete the algorithm. So some people have called it the algorithmic death penalty. And they are starting to use it more and more. So I think this could have been impractical, but I think it's obviously more political. If you're working in the US, you better be damn sure you can use the data you're using, or your entire algorithm might be just removed, which honestly I think is fabulous. I don't think that companies should be able to continue to profit from things that they built using stuff they stole. Call me, a radical, I guess, but I think this is a very reasonable response to training algorithms with stolen data. Yeah, and I guess we see how that's going to dovetail with this Oracle, or how this might potentially dovetail with this, Oracle lawsuit, because I mean, for me, I think what would make the most sense is that it's just, again, it gets deleted, and people get, some measure of their privacy back and have this amassed data about them removed, and anything trained using on it also gets, destroyed. So yeah, we'll see. Watch this space. All right, ethics. Do I need coffee? No, I'm doing okay. I could do with a little smack, but I'm not gonna eat on mic. All right, this first one. So, excuse me. There is this thing. So it's an AI wrapper. So-called, basically I think it's a Vocaloid, right? And we talked on the channel a while ago about how a lot of these that are in China are, it's a person who is voicing it, who is doing the dance moves, and then has sort of like an animation layer on top of them. But yes, it's a person. Yes, so this wrapper is yeah, using the N-word. And if you're not familiar, this is a very pejorative word. I'm obviously not going to say it against Black people, and is, routinely considered the single most offensive word in English in the United States. And it is a term that, if you are a member of that community, there are some variants that would be used in different situations. If you are not a member of that community, you shouldn't be using it, period, point blank. I think that's been made enormously clear. And also people know this. And, an animated character, which is, maybe or maybe not being voiced by a real person, hard to say, is not a member of that community and should clearly not be using that word. And, that's based on, the the clearly stated opinion of, lots of folks who have more room to state an opinion on it than I do. But yes, Robbie says, if you're on the internet, forget about Pilot. About privacy. I refuse to do that. I refuse to do that, and I refuse to believe that that is a good thing to do, and that we should just let corporations do whatever they want, because humans have rights, and the previous violation of them does not constitute rationale for the continued violation of them. Yes, and as Brett did hear, Capitol Records just decided that actually maybe this was a bad idea and they shouldn't have done it, and they dropped the rapper. Again, not a person. So yes, don't do this. What were you thinking? Yep. Yeah, so the essentially this, stunt is no longer happening. Yep. Also, okay, so this is something else. Luke says Universal's share price dropped over the last few days and only started picking up after the announcement from when I saw announcement that it was dropped. Yeah, interesting. Sometimes there's consequences for doing things that go strongly against the grain of what's considered generally acceptable. Let me put it that way. All right, so this startup, and the reason that they're in the news, they've been around for a while, is that they got a lot of funding. So specifically $32 million Series A. And basically what this company does is it's, audio processing that makes, there have been some claims that they remove accent. That is impossible. All speech is accented speech. What they do is they change the accent to sound more like a white Californianer, basically, an educated white Californianer. And yeah, that's what they do, and they're getting a lot of money to do it. Yeah. Oh, Cognition says, I don't even think the lyrics on this project were properly generated. I'd be shocked if they were. I think it's basically a viral influence marketing gimmick, but the lyrics seem handcrafted to me. It would be one thing, still not great, if a generative algorithm picked that word out of the bag on its own, but I don't think that's what happened. Yeah, literally, if you're not familiar with sort of the history of the US, I think there was also internationally, there was this thing called minstrel shows that were very popular, particularly in the North, where white performers would put on blackface and present a caricature of African Americans that was intended to be humorous for the entertainment of a predominantly white audience. And I think that, this is I'll go back so we're looking at the right thing that we're talking about. And I think this is a clear extension of that, caricature and impersonation in our current times, right? And it's not like, listen, y'all, I don't know if many of you are sort of familiar with the culture around rap, but it's not like there's nobody who wants to do rap. In fact, there are many very talented rappers out there who are Black who would probably really like a record contract and would benefit from it greatly as individuals. So yes, this is bad on its face and also bad in the sort of historical milieu in which it was produced. Yeah. Oh, Luke says Universal owns Capital. Yeah, it's helpful information. Yeah, and Cognition is like, yeah, yep. Brett says, I was hoping for Surfer Dude voice. Yeah, I think it's a little bit more like, you know, Surfer. I think it is a little bit less stereotyped of variety, but still sounds pretty Californian. Yeah, well put, Cognition. Cybral minstrelly masquerading as AI art. Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, so the reason that the founders founded this is because they are, I believe, non-native speakers, or at least are speakers of an accent that they, perceived as being pejoratively viewed, and they had negative experiences around it. So they were like, what will fix this if we sounded whiter? And the sort of commercial use case is that you would use this for your offshoring, so that your communications representatives that you are paying a small amount of money who are not native English speakers or not speakers of American English, because there are lots of native English speakers in, say, Asia. Singaporean English, for example, is the native language of many people. To make them more palatable to an imagined white audience. Yes. As a linguist, I've got lots of feelings about this. The first is that it's reinforcing this idea of a hierarchy of accents of English, where white American accents, particularly West Coast white American accents, are the best and the ideal ones and the ones that everyone should have. And that is, fundamentally wrong, right? Everyone has their accent that reflects their, place in the world. And the sort of like band-aid of changing someone's accent for, again, the perceived delight of someone who doesn't ask for it is an issue. Yeah. 9 Gaming says the image has the stereotype, making a South Asian sound white. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I thought this thread by Daniel Lufer was particularly good, who was previously at Mozilla and is now at Access Now, PhD in philosophy, him. And we're just going to sort of read through this, and then I'm going to expound some more, because like I said, I've got lots of feelings about this. The voice recognition startup is a perfect example of a phenomena I've been trying to name for a while, something like subprime automation. The basic format is this: you have a situation where human performance and well-being is far from optimal due to underlying issues, right? So a good example here is that, I'm going to try and come up with sort of a similar example that is not this, right? Actually, I don't want to take one of the other examples that he is talking about. Right, okay, so let's say hiring, right? You want to hire somebody who's going to do a really good job at a specific job. How do you do that? Well, there may be some unconscious bias that's part of that process, and that's an issue. So maybe we can use AI to solve it. Rather than addressing the underlying issues to actually improve the conditions that led to poor performance and well-being, AI is used to automate the subprime situation, right? So rather than maybe changing the hiring or like the technical interview process, for example, for a coding job, you're like, well, actually, I'm just going to use AI to, rank coders, for example, based on some sort of metric that I say I care about. Another example here, is how teachers are overworked and can't give sufficient time to grade student essays, right? So we talked about how, there's a lot of open roles for teachers, particularly in the US, because the position is very poorly paid. And also a lot of teachers are required to teach in person currently, and also not allowed to mask or ask that their students mask, which means that a lot of teachers have caught COVID and a lot of teachers have died. But rather than address these conditions of overwork and flawed evaluation criteria, AI systems that do a mediocre subprime job of essay correction are introduced. If you say, but they suck, the response is, but yeah, teachers don't do a good job either, right? So we talked, I think last week, about the automated firing. Maybe we'll be talking about it this week. Anyway, so there's been a thing where there have been automated decisions about who to fire done by algorithmically. And, you know, people who are trying to appeal it just couldn't. Anyway, so ultimately there's no improvement. We just automate and thereby reify the subprime situation and its conditions. And I think, crucially, also enrich a small set of people at the cost of, you know, society as a whole. Everything remains crappy, but with a veneer of fancy AI to make it look innovative or disruptive when it's actually reactionary, conservative, and crap. And the key points here, this startup isn't helping call center workers, really. It's a cool looking bandage slapped on a gaping wound. It does nothing about their horrible working conditions and realistically undermines structural change. In short, the subprime situation is automated and entrenched. Yeah, and especially because, you know, all of their voices are going to be run through this thing, it makes surveillance necessary to the continued operation of the call center. So anyway, and I will say, you know, a big part of my dissertation was around perceptual learning, and specifically perceptual learning of novel accents. And people can actually do that really well, given, you know, some degree of grounding. Right? So if I can't see you and I'm not familiar with the words that you're using and I don't know the specific topic that you're talking about and you're using a novel accent, it can be pretty hard to learn a novel accent. But if I, you know, let's say have a short text example that I can read as I hear you speak, it's much easier to help to learn that novel accent, right? Or if we're doing it face to face, or if we're doing it in a situation where there's objects around the room and we're referring to those objects, right? Because I have more availability of information, which can ground my perceptual learning to understand how your speech variety is systematically different from my speech variety, and sort of meet in the middle, if that makes sense. So it is perfectly possible for someone to learn to, you know, perceive a new accent. You can actually do it pretty quickly in just a couple minutes if you have the support to do it. And this extremely low context way is not that. And also just in general, like, I think there's a clear labor exploitation here, right? So why aren't people from the community where the consumers are doing these jobs? It's because they are too expensive and companies don't want to pay them. And if they used people from the community where the service was being offered to support that service, you wouldn't have this issue, right? And similarly, if, you know, these call center workers were supporting a service that was being done in their community, again, you wouldn't have this issue. And I'm not saying no one should ever talk to anybody else from any other dialect region at all. That's not where I'm going with this. What I'm saying is, if you are doing something for, you know, meeting the needs of a particular group of people, that particular group of people should be involved in the process. Anyway, so there we go. Brett says, I see it as a business is offshoring the help desk while Trill trying to sound like the job gets done locally. Yeah, absolutely. That is 100% what they're doing. And I don't love it. Let me put it that way. All right. But speaking of protecting users and, you know, supporting each other, this happened, excuse me, this week. And this was a bunch of Google workers, and I believe that this was headed by the Alphabet Workers Union, or AWU, signed a petition asking for the company to protect abortion search data. I think at press time, like when this was released on the 18th, it was 650, and I believe now it is many more workers. But just if you were wondering, you know, okay, so my company's doing something that's not great. What can we do about it? This sort of like coordinated action. And I realized 650 doesn't sound like a lot, but that was just sort of, again, like during the Signature acquisition process, because they wanted to, my understanding is that they wanted to sort of like get discussion starting about it. I think this is an example of what that sort of activism can look like, right? You can be like, with a bunch of your friends, be like, hey, this is kind of messed up. We don't like this. Change it. Oh, nope, it's this week that we're talking about. So we hadn't actually talked about this yet. And this is from Accenture, which is actually a company that I've worked for as a contractor previously. And some Facebook contractors learned they lost work with a company through a video call with anonymous representatives who said an algorithm chose random people to cut. And this was in Austin, which is in the US. So yeah, and that's awful, right? And they also only offer the option to formally apply for jobs on other Accenture projects, right? So usually it's like your contract is X amount of time. They were like, actually, your contract is ending now, and if you would like another contract, you have to reapply from the beginning. And yeah, I hate this. And also last week, I think we read that paper about, or like I sent you the link to that paper about directly discriminatory algorithms, right? And I think this is a place where that might potentially be a thing, right? I think the burden of the proof is really on this company to prove that no discrimination was done. And you know, it's Facebook. I don't really trust them, to be blunt. Yep. Anyway. Awful. Hate that this is happening. Would be great if it didn't happen. Yeah. Sacked by a tick box. Yep, absolutely. Cognition says all the payroll expense benefits of globalization without any of that pesky cultural context. And ooh, I think that's still on the screen. Get out of there. Nope. Oh, can I just make it smaller? There we go. That's better. So this is a think piece about sort of the role of Google in democracies, right? And the sort of the article talks about, you know, the current state and what it's like, and you know, sort of if what you are optimizing is to get people to click on stuff, right? And especially if you're doing personalization, it's very easy to, if those are your incentives, show people things that are wrong but intriguing, right? And you know, none of us are immune to this, and I think it's very dangerous to assume that you are. But that's an issue, and I've, you know, at one point, I think it was very common to tell people to just like Google something if they had a question, right? I mean, I think it's still common, but I also think that some folks don't understand the degree to which Google searches are personalized, right? So if I'm signed into Google and I search something, I'm going to get very different search results than what you get. And that's not the case with things like Ecosia, for example. So this is the search engine that I'm using here, which is a lot more privacy preserving. Let me pop this down so you can see the link. Oh, nope, can't do that. Anyway, it's Ecosia. Ecosia is a lot more privacy preserving. But yeah, so you can, you know, if you're doing your research with a personalized search recommendations, you can very much just continue to get the same conspiracy content over and over and over again. And there is no sort of like default information that everybody gets. Anyway. Moving on. Yeah, I guess the link is in the links, please, for y'all. I don't want to necessarily put all the links in the chat, not least because it makes the chat hard to read. Also on the ethics front, so-called. So there's this weird thing going on that's getting a lot of money, like a lot of money. And the sort of basic idea is that humans today don't matter as much as humans in the future, which is a wild thing to say. And so, you know, when you're trying to decide, you know, what's best to do, you should always think about future humans and not current humans, basically, is the kind of general, you know, idea there, which, you know, I think if you are in, let's say, I don't think that that is necessarily a bad thing to think about, you know, how your actions will, you know, ripple out and affect the future. But also, like, a lot of the sort of like core proponents, core like ideas of this particular like stance are like straight up eugenics, like straight up eugenics. And yeah, they get a lot of funding, right? So things like really focusing on, you know, space colonization, or, you know, simulated beings, as opposed to existential threats like climate change or, you know, ongoing human rights abuses, is certainly a choice. It's absolutely wild. Anyway, so this long article on it, you can read more about it if you want. I find it very frustrating. But I would leave you with this sort of ethical guidance that I've heard from multiple sources. I don't know the original source. If you do, feel free to stick it in the chat. But the idea is, if the people that you're trying to help don't know that you are helping them, you are doing a bad job, right? And not only don't know, but don't agree. And I think there's a lot of paternalism that's wrapped up in this. I think there's a lot of, you know, utter disregard for human well-being and individual human well-being that's wrapped up in this. And again, the eugenics, Jiminy Cricket. Anyway, if you're interested in learning more about this sort of like set of beliefs, I think this article is a good primer. Yeah, Mind Gaming says, even after turning off personalization in Google search, they personalize based on IP location data. Fun. Brett says, I hope they're addressing climate change. I don't get that impression. Purple Purpurin says, long-termism exposes a lot of problems when you go full utilitarian ethics. And Cognition says, yeah, definitely agree. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Oh, Lexi. I'm assuming you're just messing with me 30% of the time, so yeah. Wild. Doop doop doop. Nope. No, I want to move me. Just the me. There we go, so y'all can see it. Also, in sort of like the general ethics space, I thought this was really, really interesting. So this is a project by Tactical Tech. And as part of the Artist in Residency program by Onassis Stegi, if you're interested in learning more. But basically, it's a way to pull together different types of information about the technology that got used during the pivot and got created during the pivot. And the pivot during the pandemic, you know, the one we're still in. One of the ones that we're still in. Sorry, this one's talking about specifically COVID-19. And just sort of a lot of different types of technology that were created to be used here. So sort of like, you know, learning about systems and different things. And these all, you know, if you want to learn more about them, you can click on the things here. Biometrics, which, I mean, I've talked about quite a bit on the channel. Mobility intelligence, who's going where, when. Behavioral intelligence, like what are people doing? And then, of course, you know, who is benefiting from this? Who's making money? Always important to think about. Is this, you know, companies, or is this governments? Are they working in the public good, regardless of which ones they are? So anyway, I thought this was a super interesting just sort of like use case and bringing together different threads, and, you know, just really interesting. So, and if you click through, there's a lot more information on each of these different types of technology. And I'll post the link to this in the chat as well. There we go. So if you are interested in sort of, socio-technical systems or how technologies and society interact or epidemiology, I think a really good, useful resource, particularly if you're teaching this quarter about any of these topics, I think this could be a great thing for students, right? Like each of you take a topic and think about it. I'm probably going to use it in my teaching if any of you are taking a class I'm teaching. And also just some like handy reminders. I think actually these are all handy reminders here. Yes, except for this one. So I'm actually gonna change the order of these slightly. So this is wild, speaking of surveillance. So airports have long been a place where facial recognition technology has been used or has been considered to be used, particularly like biometrics for entry and exit. And in this case, everyone would be scanned by this, right? Because it's trying to detect if you are a specific person. And the idea is when you look at a screen, through facial recognition, they will only show you your flight real information, which I think is wild. And this is inside Detroit Metropolitan Airport. And this is deployed, this is out, I believe. Yeah, wild. Clear invasion of privacy. And also, I don't know how well this prevents other people from seeing your destination. So in addition to sort of like a technology level of privacy, I think there's also the thing where, if someone is stalking you and they just sort of like stand behind you and like, your name is X and you're going to Y and that's where you're seated. Good to know. Now I have that information. So I think that like the social engineering aspect of it is also pretty concerning. So yeah, I don't know if any of you fly or have any way to give Delta feedback on it or are flying to Detroit. Maybe, I don't know, reach out to Delta and be like, hey, what the heck? This is awful. Please don't do it. I don't like it as a consumer. Cognition says, huh? No, thank you. Yeah, I'd agree. Really nice web design. Yeah, this is beautiful. I often say that graphic design is my burden. I do all my own assets and it takes me so long. And I feel like they definitely look handmade, but yeah, I said that I don't actually, the coffee button, coffee does, but the rest of them I do. So yeah, I have a lot of respect for designers. Anyway, speaking of, eugenics at all. So there is the sort of general tip from Emily Bender. No matter how much you debias digital physiognomy, it's still harmful pseudoscience. So this is sort of like phrenology, if you're familiar with this. It's like, it's the mistaken idea that like, I can look at your nose and tell that you're a criminal, or like, I can measure your eye socket and tell that you're smart, that sort of thing. Yep, don't do that. You can't do that, and it hurts people. Helpful reminder. And also another helpful reminder by Dr. Flowers, who I don't have an affiliation for off the top of my head, and it's also not in his bio. Oh, I know that the bios are here behind me as well, but they're behind me, so. Excellent words of wisdom to take with you. Acknowledging that your work could be weaponized for shitty purposes doesn't mean don't do the work. It means take some care in how you do the work. Consider the fact that your work lives in the world and not just the academy. And in this case, I think he's specifically talking to other academics, but yeah, that applies to us as well, right? Like, real people are going to use the stuff we build, and are we making our lives better, their lives better, or not? What about the people, other people who interact with that technology? Are we making their lives better or not? So, yep. Shed says that data will be sold to law enforcement for sure. Yep. Almost certainly. And a final word of wisdom. There's so Joylyn Dellinger, we've talked about quite a bit on the channel. She studies privacy law and policy, and this is in relation to a judge rejecting an argument in a court case. rejected defendants' arguments that scanning a student's bedroom was okay because it's standard industry-wide practice to which kids frequently acquiesce, routinely used, and in general public use. Normalization of surveillance versus the bedroom. Bedroom wins. So basically, this was for a court case that I believe the privacy side won, where there was like a testing software that in order for students to take a test to like pass the courses they're paying for, they needed to scan the inside of their bedroom, which I would like. I don't show y'all the inside of my bedroom. I consider that a private space. And the defendant was like, well, you know, everyone in the, you know, horrible surveillance testing space is doing this. And the judge is like, no, no excuse. And I thought this was a really good point from Ixtility, that people frequently acquiesce isn't a sufficient reason for privacy eroding behavior, especially when there's a power differential involved. So this is the point that I think is, you know, really important for us to consider as technologists. No wonder people acquiesce if the consequences of not doing so are failing to board a plane, take an exam, enter a workplace, or if they are, let's say, nope, yep, nope, this one. Or let's say if they fail to acquiesce to, you know, whatever it is, they get fired, right? So if there's high stakes decision making and there's automation as part of it or surveillance as part of it, and your options are you can eat food and live in a house and like continue to have health insurance, or you can preserve your privacy, people are not going to choose to preserve their privacy because that's not a choice, right? Anyway, just again, words of wisdom to take with you when considering systems. And on that kind of downer, let's turn to some fun stuff. I just have a couple things here, but I thought they were cool. Actually, let's do this one first. So if you have any kids in your life who are interested in linguistics or languages, or, I mean, you are and you like reading kids' books, no shame in that. There's a new book series by Dr. Nandi Sims, Nandisims, who's a professor of linguistics at Stanford, that are educational texts specifically for kids about languages. So languages are everywhere, language varies, language in society, and Spanish in the United States. So if you are interested, they are for pre-order and they're going to be released on 9/27. So again, if you've got like a teacher in your life who's looking for course materials or like for their classroom, these could be some cool teacher gifts. Yeah. Or if you have kids who are interested in language and are just little nerds, maybe would be a good gift for them as well. And finally, I thought this was fascinating. So there's this idea in psychology called Gestalt perception, where basically the idea is that the masked part of it, of whatever, you know, broadly, you fill in the blanks, right? And people are good at filling in the blanks. And part of those blanks can be due to masking. And the masked thing, you're going to sort of fill in the blanks for yourself, right? So if you just look at this shirt and you know what the Gucci logo looks like, you can sort of imagine that underneath that paint, there is the Gucci logo. No. This is in fact a Kugel shirt. And somebody registered this as a trademark for a clothing brand in Japan, and they sell this like shirts with this logo. The sort of like, you can imagine they say Gucci, but they don't. They say Kugel, you know. And Gucci sued and lost. So I guess in Japanese IP law, Gestalt perception is not sufficient to, you know, determine similarity. Yeah, so any of you teaching psychology, add this to your slides. Yeah. Cognition says this is very funny. Yeah, and I thought it was cool and interesting. Cool, yep. It'd be interesting to see what some sort of computer vision reconstructive, you know, text OCR stuff did with that. And I bet they do Gucci. Anyway, if you want the shirt, it's available for sale in Japan for 2,500 yen. I have no idea how much that is, but all right. And that's all I had for you today. So for those of you in the links level of my coffee, actually, I'll just pop those up. If you're on this list, links will go out sometime later today. Like I said, I lost some work today, which is very frustrating, but they'll be out soon. Thank you for your support. Like I've mentioned, I think most times, I'm working towards hopefully making this my full-time job, but that does require money for the old eating food and living in-house. So I very much appreciate your support. And if you are interested in joining the Chit Chat Club level, today's a good day because tomorrow is going to be our Chit Chat Club. So that is $20 US a month, and there's a very limited number of spots, but I think there's still a couple open if you are interested. So thank you all so much for joining today. I hope you found this interesting and informative and you don't feel, too ground down by the world, but empowered to go out and learn things and make stuff better. We will be back on Tuesday for another stream that I'm not going to say what it's on because it depends on me finishing something else, whether or not it's on that. But we'll see. Fingers crossed. All right. Thank you so much for joining today, everybody. I hope you have a great day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll talk to you soon.